The woman stumbled into Paradise, Nevada on a Tuesday afternoon when the sun hung like a copper coin in the bleached sky. And Samuel Zimmerman noticed her immediately because she moved like someone who expected the world to hit her before she could hit back. It was July of 1884, and the mining town had seen its share of desperate souls passing through, but this one was different. She wore a dress that had once been blue, now faded to the color of storm clouds, and her dark blonde hair hung in a braid that had started to unravel miles ago. But it was not her appearance that made Samuel pause in his work mending the corral fence. It was the way she held herself, shoulders back despite obvious exhaustion, chin lifted even as she swayed on her feet. Samuel set down his hammer and wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm. At 26 years old, he had worked his father's ranch outside Paradise since he was old enough to sit a horse, and he had learned to read trouble in a person's bearing the way other men read the weather. This woman carried trouble like a second shadow. She made it as far as the town well before her knees buckled. Samuel was already moving, his long legs covering the dusty ground between his ranch property and the town center in swift strides. He caught her before she hit the ground, and up close he could see the pallor beneath her sun-darkened skin, the cracked dryness of her lips. But what stopped him cold were the scars. They traced along her left jawline, faint white lines that spoke of something sharp and deliberate. Another scar ran from her right eyebrow into her hairline. Her hands, when he shifted his grip to support her better, bore old burn marks across the knuckles. Her eyes fluttered open, and they were the color of sage in early morning light, green with flecks of gray. Fear flashed across her face before she could mask it, and she tried to pull away from him. "Easy," Samuel said, his voice low and steady, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "You are safe. When did you last eat?" "I am fine." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She tried to stand on her own, but her legs would not hold her. "You are not fine," Samuel said matter-of-factly. "You are about to pass out from heat and hunger, and I am not going to stand here and watch it happen. Now, I can carry you to the boarding house, or you can lean on me and walk there with some dignity. Your choice." She looked at him for a long moment, those sage-colored eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she gave a small nod. "I will walk." Samuel supported her weight easily as they made their way down the main street. Paradise was not a large town, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around the silver mine that had given birth to it 5 years earlier. The boarding house stood at the far end, a 2-story structure painted white that had already started to gray from the desert dust. Mrs. Crawford, who ran the boarding house, took one look at the woman and disappeared into her kitchen, returning moments later with a cup of water and a plate of cold chicken and bread. "You poor thing," Mrs. Crawford said, her round face creased with concern. "Sit down before you fall down." The woman drank the water slowly, as if rationing it even now, and then ate with careful, controlled bites that spoke of recent hunger. Samuel watched her from where he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. He should go back to his fence mending. He had work to do, and this woman was none of his concern. He did not move when she had finished eating. Some color had returned to her face. She looked up at Mrs. Crawford. "Thank you. I can work to pay for the meal. I am good with mending or cleaning or whatever you need." "Nonsense, Mrs. Crawford said. "It is just a meal. You look like you have been traveling rough. Where are you headed?" Something shuddered behind the woman's eyes. "Nowhere in particular. I thought I might stay here for a while if there is work to be had." "What kind of work do you do?" Samuel found himself asking. She turned those gray-green eyes on him, and again he saw that wariness, that expectation of pain. "Whatever needs doing. I can cook, clean, so I know herbs and medicine. I can handle horses if they are not too spirited. Samuel straightened. My ranch could use help. My mother passed 2 winters ago, and the house has been falling to pieces around my ears. I am better with cattle than I am with keeping a home in order. I can offer room and board and fair wages. He saw her entire body tense, saw her fingers tighten on the edge of the table. I will not be any man's plaything. The words came out hard and flat, and Samuel understood then that the scars he could see were not the only ones she carried. I am not asking you to be, he said, keeping his voice level and his gaze direct. I need someone to help run the household. You would have your own room, lock on the door. I will not touch you unless you ask me to, and I cannot imagine a circumstance where you would. I just need someone who can cook food that does not taste like boot leather and maybe keep the place from falling apart around me. She studied him for a long moment, and Samuel held her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she gave a small nod. All right, but if you try anything, I will leave and I will not go quietly. Fair enough, Samuel said. He pulled off his hat and held it against his chest, suddenly aware that he should have done so when he first entered the boarding house. I am Samuel Zimmerman. People call me Sam. Grace Vance, she said quietly. Just Grace. They left Paradise an hour later after Mrs. Crawford had fussed over Grace and given her a bundle of supplies including a sunbonnet and an extra dress. Samuel helped Grace up onto the wagon seat, careful not to touch her more than necessary, and then climbed up beside her and took the reins. The ranch was 3 miles outside of town, accessible by a rutted track that wound through scrubland dotted with creosote bushes and the occasional Joshua tree. The main house was built of adobe and wood, long and low to the ground, with a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Behind it stood the barn, the bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and the network of corrals where Samuel kept his horses and the small herd of cattle he was slowly building. It is not much, Samuel said as he helped Grace down from the wagon, but it is sturdy, and the well never runs dry. Grace looked around, and something in her expression eased slightly. It is more than I expected. Samuel showed her through the house. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large fireplace dominating one wall and a wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs in the center. 3 doors led off the main room to the bedrooms. Samuel's was the largest, his parents' old room. The second had belonged to his younger sister before she married and moved to California. The third was barely more than a closet, used now for storage. You can have Sarah's room, Samuel said, pushing open the door to reveal a small but tidy space with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the mountains in the distance. I will clean out the storage room if you would rather have your own space further from mine. Grace walked into the room and touched the white curtains that hung at the window. This is fine. It is more than fine. Samuel nodded. I will leave you to settle in. Supper is usually around 7, but I am warning you now, my cooking is terrible. If you are too tired tonight, I can manage for myself. I will cook, Grace said. She turned to face him, her arms wrapped around herself. Samuel, yes. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. Samuel considered the question, then answered honestly. I know hunger when I see it. I know fear, and I know what it is like to need a place to rest. You looked like you needed all 3. Grace's throat worked as she swallowed hard. The scars I do not need to know, Samuel said quietly. If you want to tell me someday, I will listen. But you do not owe me your story just because I gave you a job. All I need to know is whether you want the job and whether you will stay long enough to see it through. Something shifted in Grace's expression, a slight easing of the tightness around her eyes. I will stay. Good, Samuel said. He settled his hat back on his head and headed for the door. I will be in the barn if you need anything." He left her there, standing in the shaft of golden sunlight that poured through the window, and tried to ignore the strange tightness in his chest. True to her word, Grace cooked supper that night. Samuel came in from the evening chores to find the table set and a pot of stew simmering over the fire, filling the house with the scent of meat and vegetables and herbs. He washed up at the basin on the porch and then took his seat at the table. Grace served him a bowl without meeting his eyes, then took a seat at the far end of the table with her own bowl. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The stew was the best thing Samuel had tasted in 2 years, since his mother's death. "This is very good," he said finally. "Thank you." Grace's voice was soft, but some of the wariness had faded. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" He saw her stiffen, saw her hand tighten on her spoon. After a moment, she said, "My mother taught me before she died." Samuel nodded and did not push for more. They finished the meal in comfortable silence. And then Grace insisted on cleaning up while Samuel sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson and deep purple. He heard Grace moving around inside, heard the clank of dishes and the splash of water. When she finally emerged, she paused in the doorway. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" she asked. "No, get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." She nodded and disappeared back inside. A few minutes later, he heard the soft click of her bedroom door closing, and then the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. She was barricading her door. Samuel stayed on the porch until the last light faded from the sky, thinking about scars and fear and the strange woman who had stumbled into his life. The days settled into a rhythm. Grace rose before dawn and had coffee brewing by the time Samuel came in from checking the animals. She cooked breakfast, cleaned the house, mended his clothes and the household linens, and tended the small vegetable garden behind the house that had gone wild since his mother's death. She worked quietly and efficiently, never asking for help, never complaining. She also never smiled. Samuel gave her space, spoke to her politely but did not press for conversation, made sure she always knew where he was so he would not startle her. He noticed that she tensed whenever he moved too quickly, that she always positioned herself near a door or window, that she slept with something heavy against her bedroom door every night. He noticed, but he did not comment. 2 weeks after Grace arrived, Samuel was in the barn repairing a bridle when he heard the sound of hooves approaching fast. He stepped out into the late afternoon sunlight to see 3 riders coming up the track from town. He recognized them immediately. Tom Hendricks and 2 of his ranch hands from the spread north of Paradise. Hendricks was trouble. He owned the biggest ranch in the area and seemed to think that gave him the right to do as he pleased, including helping himself to other men's cattle and water rights. Samuel had managed to stay clear of him so far, mostly by keeping to himself and not making waves. Hendricks reined in his horse in a cloud of dust. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders and the gut, with a graying beard and small, mean eyes. "Zimmerman," Hendricks said by way of greeting. "Hendricks." Samuel kept his voice neutral. "What can I do for you? Heard you took in a woman. Blonde, pretty, scarred up some." Hendricks leaned forward in his saddle. "I am looking for someone matching that description. She ran off from a ranch I know over in California, stole some money when she left. There is a reward for her return." Samuel's blood went cold, but he kept his face impassive. "I have hired a housekeeper, yes. But she came here of her own free will, and she is working off her room and board fair and square. I do not know anything about any stolen money." "Let me see her," Hendricks demanded. "I will know if she is the one." "No." Hendricks's face darkened. "What did you say?" "I said no. This is my property, and you do not have any right to come here making demands." If you have some legal claim, bring the sheriff. Otherwise, I will thank you to leave." For a moment, Samuel thought Hendricks might try something. The two ranch hands were both armed, and Samuel's rifle was inside the house. But then Hendricks smiled, a cold expression that did not reach his eyes. "I will be back," he said. "You might want to think about whether protecting some runaway thief is worth the trouble it will bring you." He wheeled his horse around, and the three men rode off, leaving Samuel standing in the dust. Grace was waiting in the doorway when Samuel turned back to the house. Her face was white, her eyes huge. "You need to leave," she said, her voice shaking. "He will come back, and he will bring more men, and I will not let you get hurt because of me." Samuel walked up onto the porch. "I am not going anywhere, and neither are you unless you want to go. You do not understand, then explain it to me." Samuel kept his voice gentle. "Grace, I told you I did not need to know your story, and I do not. But if Hendricks is going to be a problem, I need to know what I am dealing with." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, that familiar protective gesture. For a long moment, Samuel thought she would refuse. Then she spoke, the words coming out low and fast, as if she needed to get them out before she lost her courage. "I was married. His name was Richard Vance. I met him in Sacramento when I was 18. He was charming, handsome, said all the right things. My father had died the year before, and I think I was just desperate for someone to take care of me. We married quickly, too quickly." She paused, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. "It started small. He would get angry if dinner was not ready on time, or if I spoke to another man, even just in passing at the market. Then the anger turned to pushing, and the pushing turned to hitting. I tried to leave twice. Both times he found me and brought me back, and it got worse." Samuel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he said nothing. "The scars," Grace continued, her voice barely above a whisper now, "he did most of them. The ones on my face were from a broken glass. The burns on my hands were from when he held them over a stove because I had burned his supper. There are others you cannot see." "Grace, let me finish," she said. "Please. I finally got away 6 months ago. He was passed out drunk, and I took what money I could find and I ran. I have been running ever since. I thought if I got far enough away, if I changed my name and stayed quiet, he would not find me. But men like Richard, they have friends, they know people, and they do not let go of what they consider theirs. Hendricks knew him. I do not know. Maybe. Or maybe Richard hired him to look for me. It does not matter. If he is looking for me, I need to go before you get caught in the middle." Samuel shook his head. "I am already in the middle. Hendricks is not going to forget about this just because you disappear. And if you run, where will you go? How far will you get before Richard or someone like Hendricks finds you again? Then what am I supposed to do?" Grace's voice broke. "I cannot keep running, but I cannot stop. If Richard finds me, he will not." Samuel said it with a certainty he did not quite feel. "You are not alone anymore, Grace. You have me and this ranch and the people in Paradise who do not like Hendricks any more than I do. We will figure this out." Tears spilled down Grace's scarred cheeks. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Samuel reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently wiped away one of her tears with his thumb. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because you matter. You matter, Grace, scars and all." She stared at him, and in her eyes Samuel saw a desperate want to believe him warring with years of pain and betrayal. "I do not need to know everything," Samuel said softly. "And I do not need you to be anything other than what you are. I just need you to stay. Can you do that?" Grace closed her eyes and more tears escaped. Finally, she nodded. "I will stay." "Good." Samuel stepped back, giving her space again. "Now I am going into town tomorrow to talk to Sheriff Morrison. He is a good man and he does not like bullies." We will figure out what Hendrix is up to and deal with it properly." The next morning, Samuel rode into Paradise and found Sheriff Morrison in his office, a small room attached to the jail at the edge of town. Morrison was in his 50s, lean and weathered, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Samuel told him everything Grace had told him, and about Hendrix's visit. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "Hendrix is a snake, always has been. If he is looking for your housekeeper, it is not because of any reward. He has something else in mind." "What do you mean?" "Hendrix has been buying up properties around Paradise, trying to expand his ranch. He has been putting pressure on the smaller ranchers, trying to force them out. Your father always stood against him, and after your father died, Hendrix backed off you some. But if he can find a way to cause you trouble, to maybe get you to sell and leave, he will do it." Samuel felt anger rising in his chest. "So this is not even about Grace." "Oh, it is about her too. Hendrix has a reputation with women, and none of it is good, but he is also an opportunist. He sees a way to get two things he wants." Morrison stood up. "I will look into whether there are any legitimate warrants out for Grace Vance." "But Samuel, if her husband is really looking for her, and if he does find her, there is not much the law can do. A man has rights over his wife, even if we do not like how he exercises those rights." "That is not right." "No, it is not, but it is the law." Morrison clapped Samuel on the shoulder. "Keep your eyes open. Do not let Grace go anywhere alone, and if Hendrix comes back, you send for me immediately." Samuel rode back to the ranch feeling unsettled. He found Grace in the garden, pulling weeds with fierce concentration. She looked up as he approached, her face anxious. "What did the sheriff say?" Samuel told her, watching the hope fade from her eyes as he explained about the limitations of the law. "So I am trapped," Grace said flatly. "Either I stay here and wait for Richard to find me, or I run and eventually get caught anyway." "You are not trapped," Samuel said. "You are safe here for now. We will deal with whatever comes." "How can you be so calm about this?" Samuel crouched down beside her in the dirt, meeting her eyes. "Because being afraid does not change anything, and because I meant what I said." "You are not alone." Grace stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. "You are the strangest man I have ever met. I will take that as a compliment." For the first time since she had arrived, Grace smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and fleeting, but it transformed her face, softening the hard edges of fear and pain. Samuel found himself smiling back. Over the following weeks, something changed between them. Grace still barricaded her door at night, still tensed when Samuel moved too quickly, but she started to talk more. She told him about growing up in Sacramento, about her mother's herb garden and her father's work as a carpenter. She told him about the books she had read, the places she dreamed of seeing someday. Samuel told her about his childhood on the ranch, about his father's gruff kindness and his mother's gentle humor. He told her about his sister Sarah and her husband, about the letters he received occasionally describing their life in San Francisco. He told her about the first time he broke a horse on his own, about the winter his father almost died from pneumonia, about the loneliness that had settled over the ranch after his mother passed. They fell into an easy partnership. Samuel taught Grace to ride on his gentlest mare, a sweet-tempered buckskin named Daisy. Grace proved to be a natural horsewoman, and soon she was riding out with Samuel to check the cattle, her blonde braid bouncing against her back as she cantered across the scrubland. Samuel found himself looking for excuses to spend time with her. He lingered over meals, drawing out conversations. He asked her to help him with tasks he could easily do himself. He watched her when she was not looking, admiring the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the rare smiles that were coming more frequently now. He was falling in love with her, and he knew it. The realization should have terrified him. Grace had made it clear that she did not want or need a man's attention. She was healing from wounds both seen and unseen, and the last thing she needed was Samuel complicating matters with his feelings. So he kept them to himself, locked away where they could not hurt her. One evening in late August, Samuel was on the porch repairing a saddle when Grace came out and sat down beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Samuel," Grace said finally. "Yes, thank you for everything. For taking me in, for protecting me, for not pushing, for just letting me be." Samuel set down the saddle and looked at her. In the fading light, her eyes were more green than gray, and they were fixed on his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You do not need to thank me," he said. "Yes, I do. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever. You gave me back myself." Grace reached out and took his hand, the first time she had voluntarily touched him. Her fingers were warm and calloused from work. "I need you to know that I see you. I see what you have done for me, and I see who you are. You are a good man, Samuel Zimmerman." Samuel turned his hand to thread his fingers through hers, the gesture feeling both monumental and perfectly natural. "You are a remarkable woman, Grace Vance." They sat there holding hands as the stars began to emerge overhead, neither of them speaking, neither of them needing to. 3 days later, Hendricks came back. Samuel was in town buying supplies when one of the ranch hands, a young man named Billy, came galloping in on a lathered horse. "Sam, it is your place. Hendricks and maybe 6 or 7 men rode up about 20 minutes ago. I tried to stop them, but there are too many." Samuel dropped the sack of flour he had been loading and ran for his horse. His heart pounded in his chest as he galloped back toward the ranch, Billy struggling to keep up behind him. He saw the smoke before he saw the ranch, a dark column rising into the clear sky. Samuel pushed his horse faster, terror clawing at his throat. If Hendricks had hurt Grace, if he had done anything to her, Samuel would kill him. He would gladly hang for it. He came over the last rise to see the barn engulfed in flames. Men on horseback were scattered around the yard. And in the center of it all stood Grace, facing down Hendricks with a rifle in her hands, Samuel's rifle, the one he kept over the fireplace. He rode straight into the yard, pulling his horse to a sliding stop between Grace and Hendricks. "Get out of the way, Zimmerman," Hendricks snarled. "This is not your concern anymore. Everything on this property is my concern." Samuel dismounted but stayed in front of Grace. "You burned my barn. You are trespassing on my land. I have every right to shoot you where you sit. Try it and my men will cut you down." Hendricks gestured to the ranch hands flanking him, all armed. "I am taking the woman. She belongs to someone who wants her back, and I aim to collect the reward." "No." Samuel's voice was flat and hard. "She is not going anywhere." Behind him, he felt Grace move. She stepped up beside him, the rifle still leveled at Hendricks. "I will not go back," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I will die first." Hendricks laughed. "Brave words from a runaway wife. Do you think Zimmerman here knows what you are? Do you think he knows you are just a piece of property that got above itself?" "I know exactly who she is," Samuel said, "and she is not property. She is a free woman and she is under my protection." "Your protection?" Hendricks leaned forward in his saddle. "You think you can protect her?" "You are one man, Zimmerman. I have 7 men here right now and I can get 20 more. You cannot watch her all the time. Sooner or later I will get what I came for." "No, you will not." The new voice came from the road. Samuel turned to see Sheriff Morrison riding in, accompanied by 4 deputies, and to Samuel's surprise, nearly a dozen townsmen from Paradise, all armed. Morrison rode right up to Hendricks, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Tom Hendricks, you are under arrest for arson, trespassing, and attempted kidnapping. Tell your men to drop their weapons." "You cannot arrest me for taking back stolen property," Hendricks blustered. "I can arrest you for burning a man's barn and threatening violence on his land," Morrison said calmly. "As for Mrs. Vance, I did some checking. There are no warrants out for her arrest, no charges of theft. The only thing I found was that her husband, one Richard Vance of Sacramento, is wanted for questioning in connection with the deaths of 2 women who worked in a brothel there. Seems he has a tendency toward violence that he did not limit to his wife." Samuel felt Grace stiffen beside him. Morrison continued, "So even if you had a legal right to take her, which you do not, you would be returning her to a man who is likely to kill her. And I do not take kindly to that sort of thing in my jurisdiction." Hendricks looked around at the armed townsmen, at the deputies with their weapons drawn, and seemed to realize he was outmatched. "This is not over," he said. "Yes, it is," Samuel said. "Touch my property again, come near Grace again, and I will not wait for the sheriff. I will handle it myself." Hendricks's face went red, but he jerked his chin at his men and they all turned and rode off. Morrison dismounted and walked over to Samuel and Grace. "Are you both all right?" "We are fine," Samuel said. His legs felt shaky with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "Thank you, Sheriff." "How did you know to come?" "Billy came and got me after he found you in town. I figured Hendricks might try something, so I rounded up some help." Morrison looked at the burning barn. "You will need a hand rebuilding that." "We will help," one of the townsmen said. Samuel recognized him as Paul Drummond, who ran the general store. "We are all tired of Hendricks throwing his weight around. It is time someone stood up to him." Over the next hour, the men worked together to put out the fire and assess the damage. The barn was a total loss, but the animals had all been turned out to pasture and were safe. Grace stood on the porch, still holding the rifle, watching everything with wide eyes. When the men had finally left, promising to return the next day to help start rebuilding, Samuel walked back to the house. Grace was sitting on the porch steps now, the rifle across her knees, her face pale. Samuel sat down beside her. "You held them off." "I was so scared," Grace whispered. "When they rode up, when Hendricks told me he was taking me back to Richard, I thought I was going to die. But then I thought about you, about everything you have done for me, about how you told me I mattered. And I got angry, so angry. I decided that if I was going to die, it would be on my terms, fighting back." Samuel wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to hold her until the shaking stopped, but he did not know if she would welcome the touch. "You were incredibly brave." "I was terrified." Brave and terrified are not opposites. Courage is being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Samuel looked at her. "Grace, Morrison said your husband is wanted for killing 2 women. Grace closed her eyes. "I am not surprised. When I lived with him, I saw that violence in him, that need to hurt. I always knew that one day he might go too far. I am just grateful I got out before I became another one of his victims. Do you think Hendricks will really back off? I do not know, but I know I cannot keep running. I am tired of being afraid." Grace opened her eyes and looked at Samuel. "I want to stay here with you if you will have me." Samuel's heart leaped. "Grace, you can stay here as long as you want, forever if you choose, but I need you to understand something." "What?" He took a deep breath, knowing he was risking everything but unable to keep it inside any longer. "I have feelings for you, deep feelings. I am falling in love with you, Grace. Maybe I have been since the day you stumbled into paradise. But I need you to know that those feelings do not come with expectations. You do not owe me anything. If you want to stay here as my housekeeper and nothing more, that is fine. If you want your own place in town, I will help you find it." I just need you to know that I see you, all of you, and I care about you. Not because of what you can do for me, but because of who you are." Grace stared at him, and Samuel watched a dozen emotions flicker across her face. Surprise, fear, uncertainty, and something else, something that looked like hope. "Samuel," she said softly, "I am broken. I have scars inside and out. I do not know if I can be what you need, if I can be what any man needs." "I do not need you to be anything," Samuel said. "I just need you to be yourself. And Grace, you are not broken. You are wounded, yes. You have been hurt in ways no one should ever be hurt, but you are still here. You are still fighting. That is not broken. That is strong." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "I do not know how to do this, how to trust, how to love again. I do not know if I even can. Then we will figure it out together, slowly, at whatever pace you need." Samuel reached out and gently took the rifle from her hands, setting it aside. Then he took her scarred hands in his, holding them gently. "I am not going anywhere, Grace. I am not Richard. I will never hurt you, and I will wait as long as it takes for you to believe that." Grace looked down at their joined hands, at his calloused fingers intertwined with her scarred ones. When she looked back up, her eyes were full of tears, but she was smiling. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me, but I think I am." Samuel felt joy burst through his chest like sunrise. Yeah, Grace laughed shakily. "What do we do now? Now we take it one day at a time. We rebuild the barn, we run the ranch, we figure out what this is between us." Samuel squeezed her hands gently. "And we do it together." Grace nodded, and then, in a gesture that took Samuel's breath away, she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. Samuel slowly, carefully, put his arms around her, holding her loosely enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She did not pull away. They sat there on the porch steps as the sun set and the stars emerged, holding each other. And Samuel thought that despite the burned barn and the threat of Hendricks and all the uncertainty ahead, he had never been happier in his life. The next morning, true to their word, the townspeople arrived to help rebuild. Paul Drummond came with his 2 sons and a wagon full of lumber. Morrison came with his deputies. Even the minister, Father O'Brien, showed up with his sleeves rolled up and a hammer in hand. Grace cooked for everyone, producing vast quantities of food that kept the workers fed and happy. Samuel caught her smiling as she moved among the men, refilling coffee cups and handing out sandwiches, and his heart swelled. By the end of the week, the new barn stood sturdy and straight, a testament to community and friendship. Hendricks had not returned, and Morrison reported that the man seemed to have given up his pursuit, at least for now. "He knows the town is watching him," Morrison explained to Samuel and Grace as they stood admiring the new barn. "And he knows he does not have any legal leg to stand on, but keep your guard up. Men like Hendricks do not forget." Samuel promised he would, and Morrison rode off back to paradise. That night, for the first time, Grace did not barricade her bedroom door. Samuel heard the absence of the familiar scraping sound and felt something loosen in his chest. It was a small thing, that unbarricaded door, but it spoke volumes about Grace's growing trust. Over the following weeks, Samuel and Grace grew closer. Samuel taught Grace to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. Grace taught Samuel to cook properly, laughing at his attempts to knead bread and his tendency to burn anything left unattended for more than 5 minutes. They worked together in an easy partnership, and slowly, carefully, they learned to touch without fear. A hand on the small of her back as Samuel passed behind her, her fingers brushing his as she handed him a cup of coffee. Small, simple touches that built into something more. One evening in mid-September, Samuel was sitting on the porch playing his guitar, something he had not done since his mother died. Grace came out and sat beside him, listening as he played an old folk song his mother had loved. When he finished, Grace said, "That was beautiful. I did not know you played. My mother taught me. I have not felt much like playing since she passed." "What changed?" Samuel looked at her, at the way the lamplight from inside the house gilded her features, at the softness in her eyes. "You did. You made this house feel like a home again." Grace reached out and touched his cheek, her scarred fingers gentle against his skin. "Samuel, I want to try something, but I need you to promise me that if I ask you to stop, you will stop immediately." "Of course. Always." Grace leaned in slowly, giving him plenty of time to pull back, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft and tentative, barely more than a brush of lips, but Samuel felt it all the way to his bones. He held perfectly still, letting Grace control the moment, his heart thundering in his chest. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "Okay," she said breathlessly. "Okay. That was okay," Samuel laughed, his joy so intense it was almost painful. "Just okay," Grace smiled, and it was the full, radiant smile Samuel had been hoping to see since the day they met. "Maybe a little better than okay. Can I try again?" Samuel asked. Grace nodded, and this time when they kissed, Samuel let himself touch her, his hands gentle on her waist, pulling her close. Grace melted into him, her arms coming up around his neck, and the kiss deepened, became something more. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace laughed. "Definitely better than okay." They sat on the porch for hours that night, kissing and talking and simply being together, and Samuel thought that he had never been so completely, perfectly happy. In October, a letter arrived from Sheriff Morrison. Samuel read it standing in the yard and then walked into the house to find Grace kneading bread at the kitchen table. "What is it?" she asked, seeing his expression. "Richard is dead," Samuel said. "Morrison got word from the Sacramento sheriff. Apparently Richard tried to kill another woman, but this time she fought back. He fell down a flight of stairs trying to get away from the police and broke his neck." Grace's hands stilled in the dough. "He is dead." "Yes." Grace sat down heavily, her face white. Samuel crossed to her quickly, kneeling beside her chair. "Grace, are you all right?" "I do not know." Grace's voice was shaking. "I spent so long being afraid of him, running from him. I do not know what to feel now." "You can feel however you need to feel," Samuel said. Relief, sadness, anger, all of it. There is no right way to respond. Grace looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I am relieved. Is that terrible? I am relieved that he is dead." "No," Samuel said firmly. "It is not terrible. He hurt you, Grace. He made you afraid. You have every right to be relieved that he can never hurt you again." Grace threw her arms around Samuel's neck and sobbed into his shoulder, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Samuel held her, murmuring soothing words until the storm passed and she sat back, wiping her eyes. "I am free," she said wonderingly. "For the first time in years I am truly free." "Yes, you are." Grace looked at him, and something fierce and joyful blazed in her eyes. "Samuel Zimmerman, will you marry me?" Samuel's heart stopped. "What? Marry me? I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not one where I am hiding or running or afraid. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to work this ranch with you and grow old with you. So will you marry me?" Samuel laughed, joy flooding through him. "Grace Vance, I would be honored to marry you. But are you sure? You do not have to marry me just because you are free of Richard. I am not marrying you because I am free of him. I am marrying you because I am free to choose, and I choose you. I love you, Samuel. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are, because you are kind and patient and good, because you make me laugh and you make me feel safe, because when I imagine my future, you are in it." Samuel pulled her close and kissed her deeply. "Yes," he said against her lips. Yes, I will marry you. 1,000 times yes. They were married 2 weeks later in paradise, with the whole town in attendance. Grace wore a dress that Mrs. Crawford and the other town women had sewn together, a beautiful creation of white lace and satin. Samuel wore his best suit, and when Grace walked down the aisle of the small church on Sheriff Morrison's arm, Samuel felt tears prick his eyes. Father O'Brien performed the ceremony, and when Samuel slipped the simple gold band onto Grace's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, he meant every word with his whole heart. The town threw them a celebration at the boarding house, with music and dancing and more food than Samuel had ever seen in one place. Grace danced with Samuel, her face glowing with happiness, and Samuel thought that he must be the luckiest man alive. That night when they returned to the ranch, Grace took Samuel's hand and led him to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. She was nervous. He could see it in the way her hands shook slightly as she reached up to unpin her hair, but she was also determined. "I want this," she said softly. "I want you. But Samuel, I need you to be patient with me. I have never known gentleness in this, and I might need to stop or slow down." "We will go as slow as you need," Samuel promised. "And if you want to stop at any point, we stop. No questions, no pressure." What happened between them that night was tender and careful and beautiful. Samuel took his time, learning every inch of Grace's body, showing her with hands and lips and whispered words that she was cherished and adored. When Grace cried, he held her and waited until she was ready to continue. When she smiled, he smiled back and poured all his love into every touch. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Grace's head on Samuel's chest, his arms around her. "Thank you," Grace whispered. "For what? For being you. For showing me that love does not have to hurt." Samuel kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me enough to find out." They fell asleep that way, wrapped around each other, and Samuel thought that if he died tomorrow, he would die a happy man. The winter was mild that year, and Samuel and Grace settled into married life with an ease that felt miraculous given everything Grace had endured. Grace bloomed like a flower finally given water and sunlight. She laughed more, smiled more, relaxed into her safety and happiness. She also proved to be a natural rancher. She had a way with the horses that amazed Samuel, and she could rope a calf almost as well as he could. Together, they built the ranch into a thriving enterprise, adding to the herd and improving the property. In January, Grace announced that she was pregnant. Samuel was so happy he picked her up and spun her around, only setting her down when she laughingly protested that he was making her dizzy. They spent the evening making plans, discussing names and debating whether to add onto the house or convert the old storage room into a nursery. "I want to be a good mother," Grace said that night as they lay in bed. "But I am afraid. What if I am like Richard? What if I hurt our child?" "You will not," Samuel said firmly. "Grace, you are nothing like him. You are kind and loving, and you will be an amazing mother." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you. I see the way you care for everything around you, the gentleness in your touch, the love in your heart. Our child will be the luckiest kid in the world to have you as a mother." Grace curled against him, and Samuel felt her relax. "I love you, Samuel Zimmerman." "I love you too, Grace Zimmerman." Their son was born in early September of 1885, a healthy baby with a lusty cry and his mother's gray-green eyes. They named him James, after Samuel's father, and Samuel thought his heart might burst when Grace placed the tiny bundle in his arms for the first time. Parenthood was exhausting and wonderful, and terrifying all at once. Samuel marveled at how something so small could take up so much space in their lives and hearts. Grace was a natural mother, patient and loving, though Samuel could see the fear still lurking in her eyes sometimes when James cried or fussed. "You are doing beautifully," Samuel would assure her during those moments. "He is perfect, and you are perfect." James thrived, growing into a chubby, cheerful baby who seemed to find joy in everything. Grace relaxed more as time went on, her confidence as a mother growing with each passing day. In the spring of 1886, Hendricks died. He was thrown from his horse while drunk and hit his head on a rock. Samuel felt no sorrow at the news, only relief that the threat was finally, truly gone. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered. James grew into a curious, active toddler who followed Samuel around the ranch like a shadow. Grace continued to bloom, her scars becoming simply a part of her rather than something that defined her. In the summer of 1887, Grace gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Samuel's mother. Rose was smaller than James had been, with blonde curls and her father's dark eyes, and she had Samuel wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The years rolled on, marked by small joys and everyday challenges. James started helping with the ranch chores, his childish enthusiasm more hindrance than help but charming nonetheless. Rose grew into a sweet but stubborn little girl who was not afraid to voice her opinions on everything. In 1890, Grace gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas. Thomas was quiet where James had been boisterous, thoughtful where Rose was impulsive. Samuel loved watching Grace with their children, loved seeing her become the person she was always meant to be, unshackled from fear and pain. One evening in late summer of 1892, Samuel sat on the porch watching the sun set. Grace came out and settled beside him, fitting against his side the way she always had. The sounds of their children playing in the yard drifted to them on the warm breeze. "You ever think about that day?" Grace asked. "The day I stumbled into paradise." "All the time," Samuel admitted. "I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If you had chosen a different town, if I had not been there that day, if you had not trusted me enough to stay. I think about it too. I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that I would never be safe, never be happy. And then you said those words." Grace looked at him, her eyes soft with love. "You told me you did not need to know my story. You told me all I needed to do was stay." "Best decision I ever made," Samuel said. "Best decision I ever made, too." Grace took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything. For giving me a home, a family, a life. For loving me despite the scars." "Not despite them," Samuel corrected gently. "With them. Your scars are part of your story, Grace, and your story made you who you are. I love all of you, scars included." Grace leaned up and kissed him, a soft kiss full of love and promise and 8 years of shared life. "I love you, Samuel Zimmerman." "I love you too, Grace Zimmerman. Always." As they sat there watching their children play, Samuel thought about the scared, scarred woman who had stumbled into his life that hot July day in 1884. He thought about how far they had both come, how much they had built together. He thought about the future stretching ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. James came running up to the porch, Rose and Thomas trailing behind him. "Pa, Ma, come play with us." Samuel looked at Grace, who smiled and nodded. Together, they stood and went to join their children, leaving the past behind and embracing the beautiful, imperfect, perfect life they had created together. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. By 1895, James was 10 years old and already showing signs of becoming a skilled rancher like his father. He had Samuel's steady temperament and Grace's way with animals, a combination that served him well. Rose, at 8, was a spirited force of nature, who kept everyone on their toes with her endless questions and fearless exploration of the world around her. Thomas, at 5, remained the quiet observer, but Samuel had noticed the boy had a gift for understanding how things worked, whether it was the mechanism of a gate latch or the mood of a nervous horse. Grace had grown into her role not just as a mother, but as a pillar of the Paradise community. The women of the town sought her advice on everything from herbal remedies to handling difficult situations. The men respected her opinion on livestock and land management. The scars on her face had faded to pale silver lines that she no longer tried to hide, wearing them instead as badges of survival and strength. Samuel, now 37 years old, had built his father's modest ranch into one of the most successful in the region. But more than that, he had built a family, something he treasured far more than any financial success. One autumn afternoon, Samuel and Grace were working together to bring in the last of the harvest from the vegetable garden when a wagon came rumbling up the track from town. Samuel shielded his eyes against the afternoon sun and recognized Paul Drummond from the general store. "Afternoon, Paul," Samuel called out as the wagon approached. "What brings you out here?" Paul climbed down from the wagon, his weathered face creased with concern. "Sam, Grace, I wanted to come tell you myself before you heard it from someone else. There is a woman in town asking questions about you." Samuel felt Grace tense beside him. He reached out and took her hand. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about a woman matching Grace's description, about when she came to Paradise, about whether she is still here." Paul pulled off his hat and turned it in his hands. "The woman claims to be Richard Vance's sister. Says she wants to meet the widow of her brother to make amends for what he did." Grace's hand tightened on Samuel's. "Richard did not have a sister. He was an only child." "That is what I thought might be the case," Paul said grimly. "Morrison is looking into it, but I figured you should know." After Paul left, Samuel and Grace stood in the garden, the forgotten vegetables scattered around their feet. "It never ends, does it?" Grace said quietly. "The past never stays buried." "We do not know what this woman wants," Samuel said. "Maybe she really is just someone who knew Richard and wants to talk to you. Or maybe she is someone Richard told about me before he died, someone he sent to find me if anything happened to him." Grace looked up at Samuel, and he saw the old fear flickering in her eyes. "What if he did not work alone? What if there are others out there who want to hurt me?" "Then we will deal with them the same way we dealt with everything else," Samuel said firmly. "Together. Grace, you are not the same frightened woman who arrived here 11 years ago. You are stronger now, and you are not alone." Grace took a deep breath and nodded. "You are right. I am tired of being afraid of shadows." The next morning, Samuel and Grace rode into Paradise together, leaving the children in the care of Maria, a young Mexican woman from town who often helped Grace with the household work. Samuel noticed how Grace sat straight in her saddle, her chin lifted, meeting the curious gazes of the townspeople with calm directness. They found Sheriff Morrison at his office. He was older now, his hair more gray than brown, but his eyes were still sharp. "I was expecting you," Morrison said, gesturing them inside. "The woman is staying at the boarding house. Her name is Catherine Brennan, and she claims she was Richard Vance's half-sister. Says they had the same father but different mothers, and she only learned about Richard's death recently." "What does she want?" Grace asked. "She says she wants to apologize to you for what Richard did. Says she knew he had violent tendencies and tried to get him help, but he always refused." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "I have been asking around. She arrived from Sacramento 3 days ago, has been very polite and respectful to everyone, paid for her room in advance. She does not seem like she is here to cause trouble, but I have learned not to take things at face value." "I want to talk to her," Grace said suddenly. Samuel turned to her. "Grace, are you sure? I need to know what she wants. I need to look her in the eye and see if she is telling the truth." Grace's jaw was set in that stubborn line Samuel knew well. "I spent years running and hiding. I will not do it anymore." Morrison arranged for the meeting to take place in his office, neutral ground where he and Samuel would both be present. An hour later, Catherine Brennan walked through the door. She was a small woman, perhaps 40 years old, with dark hair streaked with gray and tired brown eyes. She wore a simple traveling dress and carried herself with quiet dignity. When she saw Grace, she stopped. "Mrs. Zimmerman," she said softly, "thank you for agreeing to see me." Grace studied her for a long moment. "Sheriff Morrison says you claim to be Richard's half-sister." "I am his half-sister. Our father was not a good man, and he abandoned my mother when she became pregnant with me. He later married Richard's mother, but from what I understand, he was no better to that family than he was to mine." Catherine took a step closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I came here to tell you how deeply sorry I am for what Richard did to you." "How do you know what he did to me?" Grace's voice was carefully controlled. "Because I saw what he did to his first wife." The words hung in the air like smoke. "His first wife." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Catherine nodded sadly. "Her name was Mary. Richard married her when he was 22, and for the first few months, everything seemed fine. But then he started hitting her. I tried to help her leave, but Richard found out and cut me off from seeing her. A year later, Mary died. The doctor said it was a fall down the stairs, but I never believed it." Grace sat down heavily in the chair Morrison offered. Samuel moved to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "I did not learn about you until after Richard died," Catherine continued. "I found letters in his things, letters where he talked about hunting for his escaped wife, about making you pay for leaving him. I knew then that you had survived him, and I had to find you, had to tell you that you were not alone, that there was someone who believed you, who knew what he was." "Why?" Grace asked. "Why does it matter now? He is dead. I am safe." "Because I could not save Mary, but maybe I can give you something she never had. Peace. Closure. The knowledge that it was not your fault, that nothing you did made him into what he was. He was broken long before he met either of you." Catherine's voice broke. "I failed Mary. I will not fail you too." Grace was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and walked over to Catherine. Samuel tensed, ready to intervene if needed, but Grace simply looked into the other woman's eyes. "Thank you," Grace said finally. "Thank you for coming all this way to tell me this. It does help, more than you might think." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "You are kind to say so. I do not deserve your kindness." "You are not responsible for what Richard did any more than I am," Grace said. "We were both victims of his violence in different ways." The two women stood there for a moment, connected by shared pain and survival. Then Catherine reached into her bag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "There is one more thing. When I was going through Richard's belongings, I found this. I think it belonged to you." She handed the bundle to Grace. Grace unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside was a small silver locket on a delicate chain. Grace's breath caught. "My mother's locket," she whispered. "I thought Richard had sold it or destroyed it. He took it from me the first time I tried to leave. It was hidden in a box with some money and other jewelry. I thought you might want it back." Grace clutched the locket to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. You cannot know what this means to me." Catherine stayed in paradise for 3 more days. During that time, she and Grace talked for hours, sharing stories about Richard, about his violence, about the ways they had both been touched by his darkness. It was a strange healing, this sharing of pain, but Samuel could see Grace shedding another layer of fear with each conversation. On the day Catherine left, She and Grace embraced like old friends. "If you are ever in Sacramento, please come see me," Catherine said. "I would like to know how your life turns out." "I will," Grace promised. That evening, Grace sat on the porch with Samuel, the silver locket around her neck catching the last rays of the setting sun. "My mother gave me this locket on my 16th birthday," Grace said softly. "Inside, there is a tiny portrait of her and my father. When Richard took it, I felt like he had taken the last piece of my family, the last piece of who I was before him." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "And now you have it back." "Yes, and it feels like closing a circle, like I can finally put all of that behind me for good." Grace leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder. "I spent so many years afraid of Richard, even after he died. Afraid of his shadow, his memory, the possibility that there might be others like him hunting me. But meeting Catherine, hearing about Mary, understanding that Richard's violence was not about me but about something broken inside him, it freed me from the last chains he had on me." "You are an amazing woman, Grace Zimmerman," Samuel said. "I am a lucky woman," Grace corrected. "Lucky that I stumbled into paradise, lucky that you were there that day, lucky that you saw something worth saving in a scared, broken stranger." "You were never broken," Samuel said. "Hurt, yes, scarred, yes, but never broken." Grace smiled and turned her face up to kiss him. "I love you, Samuel Zimmerman, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Zimmerman." The years continued their steady march forward. James grew into a young man who combined his father's integrity with his mother's resilience. At 17, he was already taking on significant responsibilities around the ranch and had begun courting the daughter of a rancher from the neighboring county, a sensible girl named Elizabeth, who impressed both Samuel and Grace with her good humor and work ethic. Rose, at 15, had developed into a formidable young woman with strong opinions and an unshakable sense of justice. She talked about becoming a teacher, about going to school in San Francisco or even back east. Samuel and Grace encouraged her dreams while secretly hoping she would not go too far away. Thomas, now 12, remained the quiet observer, but he had discovered a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the horses, the landscape, the people around him. Grace had started saving money for art supplies, dreaming of the day they might send him to study properly. In 1898, Grace gave birth to their fourth child, another daughter they named Catherine, after the woman who had given Grace back her mother's locket and with it, a piece of her peace. Little Catherine, with her dark curls and mischievous smile, completed their family in a way Samuel had not realized was missing. Samuel was 40 years old now, his body bearing the marks of years of hard ranch work, his face weathered by sun and wind. But when he looked at Grace, now 36 and even more beautiful to him than she had been at 25, he felt like the luckiest man alive. One evening in the summer of 1899, the whole family gathered on the porch after supper. James and Elizabeth sat close together, their hands intertwined. Rose was reading aloud from a book of poetry, her clear voice carrying across the yard. Thomas sketched by lamplight, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Grace rocked baby Catherine, humming softly. And Samuel sat in his favorite chair, his guitar across his lap, playing gentle chords that wove through the evening air. "Pa," Thomas said suddenly, looking up from his sketch, "tell us again how you and Ma met." "You have heard that story 100 times," Samuel said with a laugh. "Tell it again," Rose insisted, setting down her book. "I want Elizabeth to hear it." Samuel looked at Grace, who smiled and nodded. "All right," Samuel said, setting aside his guitar. It was July of 1884, the hottest summer Paradise had seen in years. I was mending a fence when I saw a woman stumble into town. She was dusty and exhausted and looked like she had been traveling hard. But what struck me was not her appearance. It was the way she carried herself, like she expected the world to hit her but was determined to stay standing anyway. Grace picked up the story. I was running. I had been running for months and I was at the end of my strength. I thought paradise would just be another stop, another place to rest for a night before moving on. But then this stubborn cowboy caught me when I collapsed and refused to let me give up. I offered her a job, Samuel continued. She was suspicious and she had every right to be, but she was also desperate enough to take a chance, and that chance turned into the greatest blessing of my life. What did you say to her? Elizabeth asked shyly. To make her trust you. Samuel looked at Grace, remembering that pivotal conversation on the porch. I told her I did not need to know her story. I told her all she needed to do was stay. And I did, Grace said softly. I stayed and I found a home. I found a family. I found love. I found myself. James cleared his throat, and Samuel saw that the young man's eyes were suspiciously bright. That is a good story, Pa. It is a true story, Samuel said. And the best part is that it did not end that day in paradise. It is still going every day, getting better all the time. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Samuel and Grace stood on the porch looking out at the ranch they had built together. The moon was full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had never come to paradise? Samuel asked. Sometimes, Grace admitted, but I do not dwell on it. The past is past, and dwelling on it does not change anything. What matters is that I am here now with you, with our children, living a life I never dreamed was possible. You know what I think about, Samuel said. I think about all the things that had to happen exactly right for you to end up here. If you had chosen a different direction, a different town. If I had been working somewhere else that day, if you had not decided to trust me, every single moment had to fall exactly into place. Are you saying fate brought us together? Grace asked with a teasing smile. I am saying I am grateful for whatever cosmic coincidence or divine intervention or sheer dumb luck brought you into my life. Samuel pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You know, when my mother died, I thought my life was over in a way. Not that I wanted to die, but I could not imagine ever being truly happy again. The ranch felt empty, the house felt empty, I felt empty. And then you arrived and slowly, piece by piece, you filled all those empty spaces. You did the same for me, Grace said. When I left Richard, I did not think I would ever feel safe again, never mind happy. I thought I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the blow to fall. But you showed me that there were still good men in the world, that love did not have to hurt, that I deserved kindness and respect and happiness. They stood there in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the night sounds of the ranch around them. Samuel. Grace said finally, yes. When I am old and gray and our grandchildren ask me about my life, do you know what I am going to tell them? What? I am going to tell them that I arrived with scars I would not explain, and a cowboy said he did not need to know, just stay. And staying was the bravest and best thing I ever did. Samuel tightened his arms around her. Stay forever, Grace. Stay with me forever. Forever, Grace promised, and then some. The turn of the century came and went, marked by celebration in paradise and quiet contentment at the Zimmerman ranch. James married Elizabeth in a beautiful ceremony in the spring of 1901, and by the following winter, they had given Samuel and Grace their first grandchild, a healthy baby boy named Samuel James, but called James Jr. to avoid confusion. Holding his grandson for the first time, Samuel felt the weight of years and blessings settle over him. He was 43 years old, no longer a young man but not yet old, and he was surrounded by more love than he had ever thought possible. Rose did eventually go away to school, attending a teaching college in San Francisco in 1902. Grace cried when they put her on the train, but they were tears of pride as much as sadness. Their daughter was fearless and brilliant, chasing her dreams the way Grace had never been able to when she was young. Thomas remained at home, helping with the ranch but spending more and more time on his art. In 1904, several of his drawings were displayed at the county fair and won prizes. A buyer from San Francisco offered to sponsor his studies at an art school in the city, and after much discussion, Samuel and Grace agreed to let him go. Watching their children build their own lives filled Samuel and Grace with pride and a bittersweet awareness of time's passage. Little Catherine grew into a spirited child who looked remarkably like her mother, but had her father's steady temperament. She followed Samuel around the ranch, asking endless questions and learning everything she could about horses and cattle and the land. In the summer of 1906, Rose came home for a visit, bringing with her a young man named Henry Porter, a fellow teacher she had met in San Francisco. Samuel liked him immediately, appreciated the way he looked at Rose with respect and admiration rather than possession. When Henry asked for permission to marry Rose, Samuel gave his blessing gladly. They were married that fall in Paradise, with what seemed like the whole town in attendance. Samuel walked his daughter down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in Henry's, he caught Grace's eye across the church. She was crying, but she was smiling too, and Samuel knew she was thinking the same thing he was. Their children were happy, safe, building lives full of love and possibility. Everything they had worked for, everything they had overcome, had been worth it. By 1908, the Zimmerman family had expanded considerably. James and Elizabeth had 3 children now, all boys, keeping the young couple busy and bringing endless joy to Samuel and Grace. Rose and Henry had settled in Sacramento, where Rose taught at a school for girls and Henry worked as a schoolmaster. They visited regularly, and Rose's letters were full of stories about her students and her life. Thomas was making a name for himself as an artist in San Francisco, his paintings beginning to sell in galleries. He sent money home to his parents, though Samuel always sent it back with notes telling him to invest in his career. Catherine, now 14, showed no signs of wanting to leave the ranch. She had her mother's way with herbs and healing, and people from Paradise often came to the ranch seeking remedies and advice. Grace taught her everything she knew, and together they cultivated an impressive garden of medicinal plants. Samuel was 50 years old now, his body feeling the accumulated aches of decades of hard work, but his heart was full. He and Grace had been married for 16 years, together for 24, and he loved her more deeply with each passing year. One evening in late autumn, Samuel and Grace took a ride out to their favorite spot on the ranch, a small rise that overlooked the valley and offered views of the mountains in the distance. They had come here often over the years, whenever they needed to think or talk or simply be together away from the bustle of family life. They dismounted and sat on the large flat rock that served as their usual perch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Grace asked. "Of course. It was a few months after we married. You had never seen the ranch from this angle, and I wanted to show you how beautiful it was. You told me that this was your favorite place in the world, and that sharing it with me made it even more special." Grace leaned against Samuel's shoulder. "I had never had a favorite place before. Everywhere I lived with Richard, I was just surviving, just enduring. But that day, sitting here with you, I understood what it meant to have a place that felt like home." "This ranch is our legacy," Samuel said. "Everything we built, everything we created together. When I am gone, this will be what remains." "When we are both gone," Grace corrected. "Do not talk like you are going anywhere without me," Samuel laughed. "All right, when we are both gone. But Grace, I need you to know something. This ranch, our children, our grandchildren, all of it is wonderful. But the greatest thing I ever did, the thing I am most proud of in my life, was loving you. Everything else came from that." Grace was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I came to paradise believing I was unworthy of love, that I was damaged beyond repair. You taught me that was not true. You loved me not despite my scars, but with them you saw beauty where I saw only brokenness. That gift, the gift of seeing myself through your eyes, that changed everything. It gave me back my life." "You did not need me to give you back your life," Samuel said gently. "You took it back yourself. I just held the door open. You did more than that. You created a space where I could heal, where I could become who I was meant to be. You gave me safety and love and patience and time. That is not just holding the door open, Samuel. That is building an entire house and inviting someone to make it a home." Samuel pulled her close, and they sat wrapped in each other's arms as the stars began to emerge overhead, scattered across the darkening sky like diamond dust. "I love you, Grace Zimmerman," Samuel whispered. "From that first day in paradise until my last breath, I will love you. And I love you, Samuel Zimmerman. Thank you for telling me to stay. Thank you for being worth staying for." They rode back to the ranch in the moonlight, their horses moving in comfortable synchronicity. Two people who had learned to move through life together. When they arrived home, they found Catherine had left a lamp burning for them in the window, a small gesture of care that made Grace smile. "Our children are good people," Grace said as they unsaddled the horses. "They take after their mother," Samuel replied. "They have a pretty good father, too," Grace said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. The years continued their relentless march, bringing changes and challenges and joys. In 1910, tragedy struck when James was thrown from a horse and broke his leg badly. The injury healed, but it left him with a permanent limp and unable to do the heavy ranch work he once did. Samuel worried about his son, but James adapted with characteristic resilience, focusing more on the business and management side of ranching, while Elizabeth and their sons took on more of the physical labor. That same year, Thomas returned from San Francisco with a wife, a fellow artist named Margaret, who was as talented and passionate about art as he was. They settled in paradise, building a small house on a piece of land Samuel gave them, close enough to be part of the family but far enough to have their own space. Thomas opened a small studio in town where he taught drawing and painting, bringing culture and beauty to the rough mining town. Rose and Henry welcomed twin daughters in 1911, much to everyone's delight. Grace traveled to Sacramento to help Rose during the first few months, and when she returned, she was glowing with joy over her new granddaughters. Catherine, at 17, surprised everyone by falling in love with a young veterinarian who had recently moved to Paradise. His name was Jack Morrison, and he was the nephew of Sheriff Morrison, who had retired the year before. Jack was kind, intelligent, and shared Catherine's love of animals and healing. When he asked Samuel for permission to court her, Samuel said yes, but warned him that Catherine had high standards and would not settle for anything less than a true partnership. "That is exactly what I want to offer her," Jack said earnestly. "I have watched how you and Mrs. Zimmerman work together, how you respect and support each other. That is the kind of marriage I want." Samuel felt a surge of pride. His marriage to Grace was not just a personal success, but an example for his children and the community. They had shown that love could be gentle, that partnership could be equal, that marriage could be a source of strength and joy. Catherine and Jack married in 1912, in a simple ceremony that nonetheless brought the whole family together. Standing on the porch watching his youngest daughter dance with her new husband, Samuel felt the bittersweet pang of time passing. All his children were grown now, building their own lives, and while he was proud and happy for them, he missed the chaos and noise of a house full of children. "They are all so happy," Grace said, coming to stand beside him. "We did well, Samuel. We did not we?" Samuel put his arm around her waist. "How did we get so old?" Grace laughed. "Speak for yourself. I am still young and vibrant, and she was." At 50, Grace's hair was streaked with silver, and lines of laughter and sun had etched themselves around her eyes, but to Samuel, she was as beautiful as she had been at 25. More beautiful, because now her beauty was layered with years of love and shared life. As the decade progressed, Samuel and Grace gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch. James took over most of the management, and his sons, now strapping young men in their teens, did much of the physical work. Samuel still helped when he could, but he also enjoyed the leisure to spend more time with Grace, to travel occasionally to visit Rose in Sacramento or Thomas in his Paradise studio, to simply sit on the porch and watch the grandchildren play. In 1915, Europe was engulfed in a terrible war, and news of it reached even Paradise. Samuel and Grace worried about the world their grandchildren would inherit, hoped the conflict would end before America was drawn in, prayed for peace, but their own peace remained unshaken. Their days were full of simple joys: morning coffee on the porch, rides through the ranch lands, visits from children and grandchildren, quiet evenings spent reading or talking or simply being together. One evening in the spring of 1916, Samuel woke in the middle of the night to find Grace sitting up beside him, staring out the window at the moon-bright landscape. "Grace, are you all right?" She turned to him, and even in the dim light he could see tears on her face. "I am fine," she said. "I was just thinking about how different my life is from what I thought it would be. If you had told that terrified woman who stumbled into Paradise 32 years ago that she would end up here, in this life, with this family with you, she would not have believed you." Samuel sat up and pulled her into his arms. "Do you have regrets?" "Not a single one." "Samuel, I have lived a lifetime in these years with you. I have known love and safety and joy. I have raised children and watched them grow into good people. I have built a home and a life that matters. I am not the same woman I was when I arrived. That woman was broken and afraid. This woman is whole and loved." "You were always whole," Samuel said. "You just needed time and space to remember it." Grace kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss full of 32 years of love. "I need you to know that if I died tomorrow, I would die happy. Not because I want to leave you, but because I have lived a full life, a good life, a life that mattered." "You are not dying tomorrow," Samuel said firmly. "We are going to live to be ancient, surrounded by great-grandchildren, arguing about who gets the rocking chair." Grace laughed. "That sounds perfect." And for many more years, that is exactly how it was. Samuel and Grace grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated the arrival of great-grandchildren, saw the world change around them while their corner of it remained a haven of peace and love. In 1920, Samuel was 62, and Grace was 58. They were both slowing down, their bodies bearing the weight of years, but their spirits remained strong. The ranch was thriving under James's management. Their children were all healthy and happy, and their family continued to grow. On a warm July evening, Samuel and Grace sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter floating on the evening breeze. "Do you remember what day it is?" Grace asked. Samuel thought for a moment, then smiled. "July 16th. 36 years ago today you arrived in paradise. I thought you might forget. I could never forget the most important day of my life." Samuel took her hand, his weathered fingers intertwining with her scarred ones. "Happy anniversary, Grace. It is not our wedding anniversary. It is better. It is the anniversary of the day you chose to stay, to trust me, to build this life with me. That choice changed everything." Grace squeezed his hand. "Best choice I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the evening. Samuel thought about all the years they had shared, all the challenges they had overcome, all the love they had built. He thought about the scared, scarred woman who had stumbled into his life 36 years ago, and the strong, beautiful woman sitting beside him now. He thought about how a simple decision to offer kindness to a stranger had transformed both their lives. "Samuel," Grace said softly. "Yes, my love. I would do it all again. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would do it all again exactly the same way as long as it ended with you." Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "The feeling is mutual, Mrs. Zimmerman. Now and always, the feeling is mutual." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars emerged overhead, Samuel and Grace sat on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the evidence of their love and the life they had built together. The scars that Grace had carried into paradise all those years ago were still there, faint silver lines on her skin and deeper marks on her soul that would never fully fade. But they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, part of the journey that had led her to this moment, this life, this love. And Samuel, who had offered her a place to stay all those years ago with no expectations and no demands, had received in return the greatest gift of all, a lifetime of love with a woman whose courage and strength inspired him every single day. Together, they had taken broken pieces and built something beautiful. They had proven that love could heal, that trust could be rebuilt, that happy endings were possible even after the darkest beginnings. They had created a family, a home, a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. As the evening deepened into night, Samuel and Grace remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's presence, grateful for every moment they had shared and all the moments still to come. Their story, which had begun with a scared woman arriving with scars she would not explain, and a cowboy who said he did not need to know, just stay, had unfolded into a beautiful testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the possibility of healing. And it was, in every way that mattered, a perfect ending and a perfect beginning all at once.